recording. Recording in progress. Okay. All right.
How to spell crook? Crook.
Crook.
Yeah.
Try it again, Shanna.
CROOKED.
Now that is crooked. If something's crooked, it's not straight. And it's related to that. So just take off the ED.
CROOK.
Yeah. So somebody says, I feel crook. That's what you say. You don't say, if you're sick, you say, I feel crook. Not I feel crooked. Crooked only relates to a physical object. Like you're building a table, you know, and the line is not straight. Oh, look, that's crooked. I'll have to saw it again.
Right.
So crooked just relates to physical lines. Yeah. We're on coming into good. Okay, we're on. Welcome to the group. Yeah, so we're just talking about a bit of English. Yeah, so I feel crook, CROOK.
Can I ask, is crook related to broken teeth?
No, that's crooked. Yeah, true. Someone's teeth can be crooked, so they're not straight.
So it's just a physical line.
Yeah.
The same spelling.
Or even a nice curve, you know, your teeth are curved, aren't they? Or the line of the teeth is curved. So if they're not within that line, not a nice smooth line, your teeth are crooked. It's quite common to say that. Yes. But not my teeth. If someone said my teeth are crook, that would mean they're bad. And especially if they say about one tooth, oh, my tooth is crook, it probably means they've got a toothache. Yeah, like bad, it's hurting. There's a nursery rhyme, look it up. Just Google this, there was a crooked man, because kids learn that word early. There was a crooked man who walked a crooked mile and had a crooked dog, a style.
Yeah, that's why I asked. The reason I asked you, because
Hi, Heinz. Heinz is here. Yeah. Yeah, and notice that word, that ED, normally you would crook as one syllable, right? And normally when you add ED, you don't make it an extra syllable, do you? It should, in modern English, it should be crooked.
Yes.
But probably because of that nursery rhymes in most languages, they just get copied, don't they? And very old language preserves in nursery rhymes. I'm sure in all your cultures, you've got nursery rhymes that have got language that's like 300 years old in it, little bits. That's an example. So crooked, if you read a lot of Shakespeare, the ED is a separate syllable, because Shakespeare is almost all of it, 90% of it, is 10 syllables per line, right? Da 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 da. Da, 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 da. That is the rhythm of Shakespeare. That's what gives it part of it, the beauty. So if you don't say that extra syllable with your ED words, you get 9 syllables, and it doesn't sound good. So, you know, that's one way amongst many. We know that people at that time said the ED as a separate syllable, but that has dropped away, except for the syllables after T and D. Battered, added, right? That's when the ED makes a separate syllable, because physically in the mouth you cannot try saying a word that ends in t, a, d, and try and make it one syllable. You can't do it. So English has shifted, except for those syllables, for those after those letters where it's physically impossible. Okay, that's why we say crooked. Just exploring this word crook and crooked, because I said my computer's crook. The other meaning of crook, which you need to know as a noun, you probably heard of films. Somebody's a crook, they're a criminal. A crook. So if they're crook, it just means they're sick, but a crook, they're a criminal. So it's an example where the article really matters. It changes the meaning a lot. Because, you know, we know Heinz is crook at the moment, but he's not a crook. get much more insulted. Got to be careful. All right. So because my computer's crooked, that's why we're on Zoom. That's the long story of it all. And I'm just going to check participants that we're all here. Yes. And Maggie is here as well. Okay.
I joined. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Good. Welcome, Maggie. And so we've got 3 Zoomers and 4 of us in the room. Good. So we've got Shana, Keiko, Heinz, and Jean, and Hilly, Jelly, and Maggie. Good. Oh. All right. We are on fallacies. We're on the second half of the document. Now, Hilly, if you can possibly share that, but if
I think you have to allow me to share it first.
that might be hard. This phone.
Oh, maybe. I think I see a share screen button now.
Yeah.
So I'll try.
Yeah.
Let's,
Yeah, good.
that is just one moment. I think I have to go back to, no, that's not right. I think it's in the downloads folder, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Good, thanks. Just to explain, we got halfway through these. When there are a dozen, we did the first 6. We'll do the next 6 now. And then we'll move on to looking at some in the media. If you want to look at your own on your electronic device, just go to Facebook and it's identify the fallacy. I think it might have a number 5 after it, because Hilly, at the moment, we're still just seeing your desktop.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just try to start it again.
And we're also seeing a very nice cat.
You just walk through the screen. Okay, oh, now I can share it. I thought it would share everything, but it just shared the folder, I guess. So now, do you see it now?
I see it. Not sure how big we can. Oh, yeah, okay. People stretch that with your own fingers like I'm doing, and you can make it the size and readable. Yep. So good. Thank you, Hilly. So if we look at, should we just read them all through? And Hilly, we want to read the first one?
Yeah. So which number are we at?
7.
7, yeah. Okay. I should be getting an A in writing class. I got an A in 7th grade.
Yeah. All right. Hopeful. All right. 8. We'll just go around. Shana, you read 8?
The more breaks an employee takes, the less productive she will be.
Okay, cool.
Don't vote for Mary Williams. She used to hit the bottle pretty hard.
Okay, so there's an idiom there, hit the bottle. Any thoughts what that means?
Drunk?
Yeah, if you drink a lot, you know, somebody had a trauma and they hit the bottle, means they kind of became an alcoholic. Yeah, Heinz.
There have been no terror attacks on American soil since the Department of Homeland Security was created. It's doing its job.
Jelly, can you read number 11?
US gun controls need to be tighter. Every year, hundreds of people are killed in armed robberies.
Good, thanks. And Maggie, if you have a go at number 12.
Yeah, sure. If we let the government ban assault rifles, the next thing you know, we will be Nazi Germany. Thanks, Obama.
Good. So those are the specimens we're tackling today. Any thoughts about any of those? I won't create a separate group for Zoomers today because I'm on the phone. We'll just stick with what we've got. here, and yeah. We don't have to start with number 7. Any of them? Anyone that you feel you can see a problem with it, a kind of logical issue, and try to describe it, or give it a name, or make up a name.
Well, I think like number 7,
Mm-hmm.
it sort of sounds like one thing leads to another.
Mm-hmm.
Just because something happened in the past, that will happen again in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure, but I sort of maybe think it could be a post hoc.
Yeah, it is sort of like that, isn't it?
But I'm not
Yes,
100%
yes.
sure.
What's a post hoc fallacy, Heinz?
Well, it says that this fallacy means that one cause relates to another cause. So from one thing, it automatically means that the next thing is the same.
Yeah, it's if one thing is after another thing, isn't it? That it's caused by that first thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just
Like
because
number 10.
it comes after it.
That's number 10. Sounds like a post hoc.
Mm-hmm. What do others think? Number 10. Why, Keiko? I think I agree. Why? Can you explain it? We'll come back to 7 in a minute.
Well, the establishment of Department of Homeland Security is not directly related to the no terror attacks on American soil. Just after that Department of Homeland Security was created, no terror attacks just happened. That could be a coincidence. No logical
coincidence.
There is no logical connection between them.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I mean, the Department of Homeland Security is actually an anti-terrorist department. It was created after 9/11 to prevent terror. So I mean, it's a relevant connection. Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily stop the terrorist attack.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So it's not so much that it's not relevant, it's more that it's not a necessary link, isn't it? Yeah.
Almost maybe a false conclusion in some ways.
Yes, it is. That's right. Because if we think there are 2 events in time, aren't there? There's the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, and then after that, a period of no terror attacks. And you're right, Keiko. It's a post hoc fallacy. Post hoc means post after. Hoc in Latin means fact. So post hoc, after the fact. So just because it's after the fact, it's caused by the fact. So post hoc ergo propter hoc is the whole Latin thing, which means exactly what I said in English. Don't worry about the Latin, but it's basically after the fact, therefore because of it, right? And it's a very common causal fallacy. There's a little family of fallacies that are related directly to cause and effect, and this is one of the key ones. Yeah, just because one thing happens and then immediately something else happens. And they happen in everyday life all the time. Yeah. I mean, my example, the reason you guys are on Zoom, right? My computer is crook. Now, my grandson, he loves cords. Yeah. And I make sure all the cords are always off. But he had grabbed my computer recharging cord and he was sucking the end of it. Right? And then I went to use it. Bloody hell. You know, he's done something with the connection.
It's got good taste.
Yeah. I thought, oh no, gee, that was an expensive bit of play. And I fooled around with it. and I even looked on Facebook Marketplace for another cord secondhand, and luckily I didn't buy it. The guy charged too much, but I was guilty of a post hoc fallacy because it was a battery problem. It was just a coincidence. It was a coincidence that he happened to suck that cord at the moment my battery stopped, right? But we jump to these conclusions, just very practical things all the time, don't we? We've evolved. Our brains have evolved for that reason,
I had one too
important
today.
purpose. Did you?
It's the car battery.
Yeah.
So I was using my water pump on my car yesterday, and today I had a mechanic looking at a fuse, and he said, "Oh," and then he put a new fuse in, and then nothing worked, and he said, "Oh, battery must be dead." So it couldn't be dead. I only used it, and it's not possible like overnight. And eventually he found that he left the lead off. Like it just, some conclusion.
Yeah. I mean, people like that, diagnostic people, are engaged in that sort of thing all the time, aren't they? Figuring out the real cause, whether it's medical or mechanical. Yeah. Yeah. So we make these sorts of errors easily, and that kind of one, where one thing happens after another, that's called a post hoc fallacy. I don't know if we've got the other. Oh, yeah. Okay, we've got another one, not post hoc. There's one called, the other common one is called cum hoc, C-U-M. Cum means together. So in that case, two things happening at the same time, often two tendencies in society. It's a common problem in sociology, psychology, the social sciences, where they've got complex systems. And possibly, medical things as well, complex system. And one thing is happening and the other thing is happening at the same time. And therefore people say, one's responsible for the other. So, yeah. I think there is a cum hoc here, or we could look at one of these as a cum hoc. But so anyway, look, we'll leave that floating. Number 10, all right, we've ticked that off, right? That is a post hoc, and the key of all of this, of course, is to understand the concept of it. So anyone, if we're all okay with that, and the idea of post hoc fallacies. Other very common post hoc fallacies are superstition. They are the basis for superstition. So, I wore my aunt's wedding ring when I did the exam and I did well. So it's a lucky ring. I'm going to wear it for all the exams in the future. Yeah. So the wearing of the ring caused me to perform well. Yeah. Could even argue that's a cum hoc because it's happening at the same time. Don't know. But I saw a black cat, and then I fell down, and my handbag went everywhere. Black cats are bad. I'm going to avoid them. They're bad luck. Or I had an accident after I saw a black cat. Therefore, black cats are the cause of the problem. There's a lot of that stuff. Yeah. Okay, so number 7 is
called non sequitur.
Right, a non sequitur. Yeah, can you explain non sequitur, Coco?
The premises doesn't. Oh, wait a minute. Premises doesn't really lead to the conclusion.
Certainly, yes. They don't. And in a sense, all fallacies are non sequiturs, aren't they? Because non-sec means to follow. Yeah. So non sequitur means it doesn't follow. And, we actually say that directly in English. That doesn't follow. The conclusion doesn't follow from the premises. So the Latin phrase is the same. Yeah, you could view it as a non sequitur. it's also kind of a hasty generalization, isn't it? Like one, we have you might have a similar idiom. In English, it's one swallow doesn't make a summer. So you see a swallow, that means it's summer. Well, kind of one's not enough, is it? We need, you know, if we start to see a couple of hundred, then we think, all right, summer's coming. So it is a hasty conclusion. We could even think of it as, in a sense, if we drew a model of it, it's like in a timeline, we've got an A in 7th grade, say the person's now in 10th grade. They could be saying, I got an A then, that the cause is my writing intelligence. I must be intelligent. So therefore that intelligence is still with me, and 3 years later, I can use it. Right? So there's a bit of deduction going on about a cause there. Which is not, one example is not sufficient to, well, it's really more induction, actually. It's the problem in induction and deduction. It's induction. Induction is what we do in science when we observe reality and we see lots of cases of something, and then we form a general rule. So we go from the particular, like I got many, many A's, and the more A's you get, the more likely it is you'll get another one, because the more probable it is that we can, hey, Vasiliki, how are you? The more probable it is that we can induce the general rule that, that person's got a certain amount of intelligence. But one sample is not sufficient to perform a valid induction process. So yes, that is the basis of a hasty generalization. Yeah.
Like a weak analogy.
A weak analogy?
Yeah.
An analogy involves this thing is like another thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, electricity is like water, because, you know, the flow and the speed and the pressure, these are similar to elements of electricity. I'm not sure, is there a comparison or a metaphor going on?
So what I was reading was this fallacy means that when someone compares two ideas or two situations that do not relate to one another, the argument becomes weak.
Yeah, that's true, but it usually is operating through a process of comparison, isn't it? This thing is like something else. Remember the one we had, we had one last week, which was a false analogy. Do you remember which one that was?
Budget, no, checkbook.
Yeah. Number 5, isn't it? If I can balance my checkbook, why can't the Congress balance the budget? Yeah. Now, they're trying to draw an equivalence, a comparison, and say, oh, these two things are equivalent here. And that's creating an analogy. One thing is like another. But as you know, everybody pointed out, one is much, much more complex and involves many, many other factors and procedures and strategies than the other. So it's like comparing apples and oranges, as we say. And so that's a false, and that one is a false analogy. Probably 7 is hasty generalization. It's using one sample to create a general rule, and one sample is not sufficient. That's why, as Keiko, you know, reviewing experimental design a lot, you have to have a certain sample size, don't you, in an experiment. The larger the sample size, the more people we test, or the more animals, or the more whatever, then the more probable the conclusion. So Vasiliki, welcome. We've just been doing number 7 and number 10. It's looking at fallacies, bad arguments, and identifying what kind. So we're just on the last half here.
Okay.
7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we can tick off number 7 as a hasty generalization, number 10 as the post hoc fallacy. Yeah. Any thoughts on any of the other ones?
Number 9 sounds like ad hominem or ad hominem.
Yeah, ad hominem, correct. Yes, it is an ad hominem. What does ad hominem mean? Or shall we just all start speaking Latin and then we'll know what it means? Because it is a Latin phrase. I don't think it sounds Greek. does it?
No. But,
Ad hominem. Sometimes-
I think it's Latin.
Yes,
It's
it's certainly
Latin.
Latin. I'm just wondering if you can
No,
figure it
it's
out.
not related with
Right.
Greek.
How do you say, so homo? What is it in Greek?
Homo means idiot, the same.
Ah, right. Ah, yeah.
Homo.
Homogeneous. Yeah, because homo in Latin
Or
means
homosexual.
person. Yeah, that's right. Same sex.
It's the same.
Yeah. So how do you say person or man in Greek?
Person
Yeah.
means atomo.
Ah, yeah. Okay.
Atomikismos,
Yes,
atomismos.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And
Man.
man is andras.
Andros. Oh, so
Andros.
that's where we get androgynous, etc.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, so different, yeah. So it is pure Latin. I thought there might be some Greek connection. Yeah, so ad hominem, I'll just spell it for everybody. AD, just one word. AD is very similar, just change the, if we in English we change the D to a T, we get at. And that's what it means. At, towards. Hominem, HOMINEM. I'll spell it again. HOMINEM. Ad hominem. It means at the person. So you're attacking the person and the character of the person, not their arguments. Yeah. So yes, that is going on there in that one, Coco, isn't it? It's attacking the person's alcohol addiction or whatever, even though they seem to be over it. She used to, in English, if we say she used to, it means you did it, but you don't do it anymore. There's the.
So this phrase means that she was addicted to the alcohol.
Yes, but yeah, you hit the bottle, it's slang.
Okay.
Right?
slang.
Hitting the bottle a lot, you know.
Okay.
But the used to bit means she doesn't do it anymore. She did, but she
In the
doesn't
past,
now. Yeah. And the person isn't looking at the policies that Mary Williams is presenting to the people or anything relevant, you know, to her election or her arguments. You know, when you don't look at a person's arguments, but you look at their personality, you're attacking the person. Happens a lot. See it all the time in Facebook arguments. I do. Okay. The longer the argument goes on, the more somebody will start attacking the person's character.
I think it's very common on Twitter.
Yeah,
Twitter.
right.
More
Yes.
common, yes.
Yeah. Social media
Yes.
of all sorts. It's yeah. No. Good. All right. What else have we got here? 8. 8. Mm-hmm.
8 could be cum hoc.
Mm-hmm. A cum hoc.
What about argument of ignorance?
Ah, okay. There is one called appeal to ignorance, but it's got a bit of a misleading name. That is where it means that we appeal to the fact we don't know something and therefore we say it doesn't exist.
Oh, okay.
the clearest example would be, to me, my clearest example is, okay, we've looked out with radio telescopes, we've looked out into the galaxy and beyond. We've had no signals of intelligent life, right? There have been no signals yet. Therefore, there is no intelligent life, right? Jumping to that conclusion. So there's an absence of evidence, but it doesn't mean, okay, this is how it's sometimes put. Absence of proof does not mean proof of absence, right? So just to say that again, absence of proof, like we don't have any radio signals from the galaxy, is not proof of absence of intelligent life. And that has this absence, something doesn't exist.
Absence. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So the opposite of existence.
Okay.
So if someone's not here today, they're absent.
Absent.
So that's your adjective. Absence is just your noun.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so it gets the name, I guess, appeal to ignorance because, yeah, you know, we don't know, do we? We've only got a certain sample and there's so many years of gathering we've still got to do, but on the basis of only a small amount of knowledge, we conclude, and a lack of evidence, it's the lack of evidence, therefore the lack of knowledge, and we conclude something falsely. Yeah, okay, we're on 8, sorry. The more breaks an employee takes, the less... So you're suggesting cum hoc, Keiko, for that one?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Or could be just over simplification.
Mm. Yeah. Yes, you could think of it as an oversimplification, I think, or an overgeneralization as well, isn't it? Yeah, you could oversimplification. Overgeneralization means we just, yeah, we instead of being more precise about the formula, we're just making an extreme generalization about all circumstances and all situations. I mean, there would probably differences in, you know, what kind of work you do. Some work demands more breaks and you're actually more efficient if you do take them, others less so, etc. So yeah, it is simplifying it, and at the same time, oversimplification, I like that, yeah, and overgeneralization. Yeah. So we've got just our last two, haven't we? 11 and 12, yeah?
So which one is it on 8 then? Or which one?
8, I think you could regard as those two things, oversimplification, overgeneralization. As I said last week, we can sometimes combine more than one fallacy.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, sometimes they are false in or problematic in 2 or 3, or if you're really clever, 4 possible ways.
Especially
You can be wrong.
Sometimes, especially on the sample or example, they may not be as accurately going to one particular.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, sometimes they've added an element, even unintentionally. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we've got 11 and 12. Now, cum hoc, I think we could apply to one of these.
In 11.
Yeah. Can you explain why you think that, Keiko, for number 11, cum hoc?
Well,
What did you say? Cum hoc?
Cum hoc, yeah.
Yes.
Now that means, yeah, it means 2 things are happening at the same time. Therefore, one thing is causing the other thing. And it's jumping to a conclusion. They might actually just be happening and they're not related to each other.
Okay.
Yeah. So
These are 2 words, cum hoc, or
they are 2 words. Cum means together. Latin again.
cum?
C-U-M.
Yeah.
Yeah. And hoc, H-O-C, means the fact, an event, something that happens.
Okay.
So fact is generally how we translate it. Yeah. So I'm just thinking there's a fly in the room buzzing around. Yeah. So I'm just going to take that as an example. So imagine we had all the lights on and we find there are a whole lot of flies in the room at the same time. What might we conclude?
If the lights off, there's
If the lights are off, it might make the flies go away. Yeah. Is that what you mean? No? Sorry. Sorry, Shane. What did you say? Say it again.
because if the lights off, that's why there are lots of light.
Ah.
Two things that happen at the same time doesn't mean one is related to the other.
That's right. But say we walked into the room and the door had been open, no one's in here, and there are lots of flies and the lights are on.
Yes, but they are relative, no?
Well, this is the point. Are they related or not? What might we conclude? Oh, there are 50 flies in the room and the lights are on.
So lights attracted flies.
Right, the lights attracted flies, that the lights have caused the flies to be in the room. Now, that might be true and it might not, but we can't necessarily, just because the flies are there, we can't say. We'd have to do more tests, wouldn't we? We have to shoo or kill all the flies, or shoo them out if we're a Buddhist, or, Jainist. Yeah, and then start again, and then have a dark room.
So that is Kumhok.
Yeah, so we'd have to repeat some sort of experiment. We'd have to have a dark room, then turn the lights on and see if flies came in fairly quickly again. And if they do, we're getting closer to. It's more probable that they are linked, but to just conclude just because they're together and no more evidence than that, if we jump to the conclusion that one is causing the other, that's Kumhok.
Okay.
But can you see that in that case, one didn't happen before the other, they're happening at the same time. At least we didn't observe one happening first. I mean, probably somebody would have turned on the lights and then the flies would have come, maybe. But we didn't observe that, we didn't know it. So I'm just trying to think of an example where two things happen at the same time. The other one that we discussed before you came, Facility, was post hoc. One thing happens and another thing, and we think the earlier thing caused the second thing, but sometimes it doesn't.
Okay.
All causes,
Post hoc.
all effects are after causes, aren't they? All effects happen after. But not all things that happen before are causes.
But something can cause something else.
Sure. Yeah, it can, but we things that happen before can cause things that happen after, but not necessarily, and we have to figure that out with experiments. Okay. If we jump to a quick conclusion, just because it's after, the first thing caused it, that's post hoc. If we come into the room and see flies and lights, and we think, the lights caused the flies. Sometimes we can have medical problems. Trying to think of an example.
Alzheimer.
Yeah.
Tau protein.
Right.
Cause Alzheimer, or because of Alzheimer. Cause the tau protein.
That's deposit. Yes, nice. That's a good one, Keiko. Yes. So the tau protein is this kind of protein we often find in the brain of Alzheimer patients, isn't it? Yes. And the person has Alzheimer's. And yes, it's a nice one because the causality could be going either way, couldn't it? Like the immediate conclusion a lot of people jump into is, the tau, these proteins are causing the disease. But it could be the disease that's caused the proteins. So, is, yeah, in medical chronic diseases that last a long time, we often find these things that exist within a person at the same time. But just looking at the two, we can't say, oh, A causes B. It could be B causing A, or it could be another hidden cause, C, which is causing both A and B, right? So, yeah, if we conclude, oh, these two things happen together, therefore one's causing the other, that is cum hoc. So we run into the problem when we have complex systems like human body systems, or we look at an ecosystem and one thing's happening and another thing. So CO2 and the temperature of the planet's going up. Now some people say, oh, that's cum hoc. Oh, that's just coincidence. How do we know it's not cum hoc? Because many other investigations, it's a bit like the flies in the room, isn't it? There's been further experiments, thousands of them,
Yes, the door is open downstairs.
to show to show that the door is open. That's right, and the flies are coming in, and the CO2 is causing
Yes.
the temperature rise. Yeah, yeah. So in a sense, the cum hoc fallacies and the post hoc fallacies are related. They're part. Often it's good to see the relationship between fallacies. They are kind of under the same umbrella as a hasty generalization, aren't they? You're jumping to a conclusion too quickly. Just because things are together, or just because one is after the other, then one of those is a cause and one's the effect. So hasty generalization plus those two, cum hoc and post hoc fallacies, are all in a package of kind of hasty generalization type. Yeah. Good. Now, the point of all of these, of course, we've got one more to go, but just to say at this point, you know, I'm trying to give examples, but best thing you can do, and the whole point of learning these is to get out there and start listening and reading and, you know, and watching TV, and you'll notice these being, we say in English, you commit a fallacy. It's like we say you commit a crime. It's like a crime of thinking. So you commit a fallacy. You hear fallacies committed all over the place. Watch, you know, a few interviews on television, within a quarter of an hour, somebody, you know, probably will be committing one. And like we discussed last week, politicians often commit them purposely because they're very emotionally powerful. And the number of people who figure out, oh, that's wrong, that's logically wrong, even if they can't put a name to it, is often smaller than the number of people who are emotionally pulled by the argument, right? And if politicians are smart and they know that, they're looking for numbers. They're looking for quantity, not quality. Now, that's not every politician, but, you know, and some more than others.
So I would even say that, like, since I first knew about fallacies many years ago, I may not realize or may not immediately be able to say this is a particular fallacy, but more often than not, I can see that there is a fallacy to it. Maybe not necessarily knowing which one it is, but knowing that something not quite right.
Right, doesn't smell right.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's something that is, you say, even as a fallacy, something that is metaphorically, you say something that, I don't know. It's something that it's not logical. It's not logical.
That's the key. Metaphor is different. Metaphors can be logical sometimes when they're used in science, because the process of science is actually quite strongly metaphorical, but metaphor generally is more associated with the arts of, you know, language, like poetry and things like that. Yeah, and even idioms in language and stuff. And I guess with with analogies, but yeah, it's more logic, not metaphor. So There's a lack of logic. That's the point.
Okay.
So, and there's lots of different ways we can be wrong.
So they mean something different, or the person that says something that is fallacy,
Mhm.
he means something else,
Mm.
or he wants to pass another message. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm
Look,
trying to understand.
yeah. Look, I think from what I understand what you're saying, the two things can happen. Most of the time, I would say people commit fallacies and they're not aware of it. They do it unconsciously.
Okay.
Sometimes cleverer people, crafty means sort of smart in a criminal way,
Yeah.
like the fox,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So a crafty politician
Yeah.
will use, or advertising people or marketing people use fallacies because they're very powerful emotionally, and they will convince a lot of people. People who are focusing mainly on logic won't be convinced, but often, then, well, like what I just said, the number of people who will be convinced by the heart rather than the head, there's more of them, right? And that's what we're going to look at in a minute. I've put up, I think this morning, that thing from Fox News. Fox News is sort of notorious for using a lot of these tricks, and we'll see some of the ones we talked about, like number 2 is ad hominem, but other ones as well, and just, fallacies in the media. So politicians and other people, even, people are trying to sell Toyota cars or Specsavers or any product, they mainly use emotion and not logic to convince people. If you look at most ads, they are designed around feeling, not logic. And therefore they often, not always, but some of them use these fallacy tricks to hook you.
Okay.
Right? So those are the conscious users of fallacies. But I think the most, 90-something% of the time, people just, commit fallacies because their logic's not so good, or because their emotions are stronger than their intellect at that point.
Okay.
Yeah. And maybe the listener gets sucked in for the same reason. Yeah. So number 11, gun controls are soft, and hundreds of people have been killed in armed robberies, but not necessarily linked, is it?
Are you tired?
Hmm?
Are you tired? Okay.
No, my phone's fine.
Maybe I'm
All right. No, thanks. But yeah. No, that's actually okay. Zoomers, are you all okay there? Better just check
I
in.
couldn't connect last week. I was in and
I
out.
saw you come in and
I
out,
couldn't-
Facility. I thought,
Oh,
what's
wow.
going on there? Bad luck. Everybody's
couldn't.
still
I was-
there. Good. I'll
What times
assume
to
that's
connect
okay.
and everything.
Ah.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm glad you managed to make it in the flesh, as we say. That's
Yeah.
great.
No,
Great.
I prefer here. I
Yeah,
prefer here.
I think face to face is.
I finished
best, but-
late work for this season. I said, okay, let's go home. But
Uh-huh.
no.
Cool. Well done. Gun controls. So lots of people can buy guns. Yeah, hundreds of people are killed in armed robberies. I guess some people do draw a logical connection, but it's not strictly necessary. I mean, there could be other factors that are causing the armed robberies. So, for example, what might they be? What are the common, the collocation is contributing factors to crime in a society? So armed robberies are high, okay? we accept that evidence. We
unemployment and poverty, bad regulation
Mhm.
from government.
Yeah,
etc.
yeah, right. Yep, true. Unemployment, if that's high, people are going to be more poverty, isn't there? Yeah, and perhaps poor welfare system. It's going to make people desperate. Go and rob a bank or rob people in the street, whatever.
Debt.
Yeah, true. Debt levels, personal debt levels. Yeah. Just social inequality generally, polarization of societies is usually strongly correlated with crime. This might be a factor. So in other words, it's a multifactorial problem. And this person's looking at one possible factor, but not necessarily recognizing the existence of others.
So this can be cherry picking.
You could think of it like that. That's true. It's got a cherry picking quality to it, hasn't it? You've got many possible factors and this person's focused just on one. Yes, true. That's what we call cherry picking. So the metaphor, here to use your term, you've got this tree of cherries and you just pick the right ones and you leave all the other ones. So you just pick the evidence you want or the arguments you want, or in this case, the factors that suit you, and you ignore evidence or other arguments that you don't want. That's called cherry picking. So yes, there's a cherry picking element to this, certainly.
You choose the most suitable.
For you. That's right. And
the right one.
Yeah, and it's more complex. So it's a complex picture, but you just pick the cherries you like and you leave the other ones on the tree.
Yeah, I see.
Does that mean the cherry present weak or down or negative? Because in Chinese culture, we have different fruit.
Right.
Maybe describe the same situation.
The same thing, do you?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
we use
Interesting.
different fruit.
Right.
But that kind of fruit normally very, very, very soft. Not hard.
That's a good point. Does it mean that the cherries that are picked are like the evidence that they present is problematic? Not necessarily. No. The evidence that's in the cherry, if you like, that they pick, it could have some substance or value, but the person is just distorting the picture by picking only certain things and not others. This has come up especially in the climate debate. When you've got climate deniers, climate change deniers, the climate's not changing, and you've got mainly meteorologists and climate scientists, they will accuse each other of cherry picking the data because there's so much data out there, right? There's billions and billions of bits of information collected from satellites and weather stations and buoys floating on the ocean. Not boy as in little boy, right? A boy is a piece of plastic, so all that data, and one side will say, "Oh, you're only picking the oceanic figures. You haven't looked at the cities, or you haven't looked at the satellite data. You're only looking at the ocean, etc." So that goes on, especially when you're discussing really complex, multifactorial situations like this. There are many factors. This person's picked one.
Could that be also part like false dilemma a little bit as well? Because it's sort of
false dilemma is more when there's two things only.
Yeah, I specifically got two.
Yeah, Yeah, because the dilemma is like, it's either this or that. Yeah.
That's not a fallacy.
Hmm?
No.
But this is in the sense that the person is just focused on that one.
So and
thing.
this is fallacy as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they're not considering all those other factors.
Okay.
And possibly, I mean,
in some ways, but okay, Forced Dilemma talks about two options,
mhm.
but in the end, it's all about that there might be a lot more options available.
Yeah, I see your point. Yeah, because False Dilemma shuts it down to just two things, doesn't it? In this case, they're shutting it down to really one thing. Yeah. And in a sense, you could say there's a cum hoc element here. That they're focusing on this and saying that's happening. At the same time, lots of people are being killed in armed robberies. Therefore, this thing is causing that.
Yeah.
So I'd say it's a bit of a combination again of those two elements are in there. There's cherry picking and there's some cum hoc fallacy going on as well.
He doesn't like cherries.
That's interesting. In Chinese, you have the same sort of idiom, metaphor, but using fruit picking. Yeah, but it's a different sort of fruit.
These are different situations. Normally, just some people with power or just very mean, they bully the weaknesses and then young people anyway, not as powerful as them. And then, but still, one of the weaknesses in a group, but the bully side didn't pick others, but picked the small one, the easy to attack one.
Pick on. It's a phrase of it. When you pick on someone, you bully them. Like you pick out one person from the group and you attack that one person. Oh, you're picking on me.
It's normally used for school students.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Kids.
They're more weak.
Pick one person and pick on them. Yeah. Right. So it's a different meaning there. And
this fruit.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
What is it?
Lotus.
Lotus.
Yes.
Is
I
it?
think.
Persimmon.
Persimmon. Yeah. Really? Yeah. We have them. Quite expensive, I think, aren't they? Yeah.
One moment, please. Sorry.
Because when these fruits are ripe,
Right.
very, very soft.
Yes.
Yeah,
True.
so,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you just a little bit touch broken. So that
Right.
means
Very
weak.
delicate.
Yeah.
Right. I see.
You should pick up when it's fair. It's still nice, isn't it?
Pick it. You should pick it. Pick up is off the ground.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. From just fruit is just pick, no preposition. You pick fruit. Pick an orange. Pick an apricot. Yeah.
No, but I think it's the same with the lotus.
Same as.
Lotus.
Right. Is it? Persimmon and lotus the same. Okay.
They belong actually in the same
Family. Do they? Okay.
They look the same actually.
Right. I think
Sorry.
it's very Greek, isn't it? Because Ulysses
Yes,
goes to the
yes.
island of the lotus eaters.
Exactly.
Maybe just like orange and mango, they look almost the same.
Right, but are different.
The color and shape.
True.
You could also have something like that as a pick-me-up.
A pick-me-up?
Yeah, like have something good to.
Yeah, to boost
feel
your
better
energy.
a little bit,
Yes. Although Lotus
Yeah.
in the Ulysses story put them all to sleep, didn't it? I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if someone eat from this, you lost your memory. You're losing your memory.
Really?
Yeah. In the story. anyway.
In the story,
Yeah.
not in reality.
Yeah.
Not in reality now.
All right, number 12. if we let the government ban assault rifles, the next thing you know will be Nazi Germany. Thanks, Obama.
Mhm.
So
If we-
This has got a very particular name, this one.
slippery tip, slippery slope.
Slippery slope.
Slope.
Slippery slope. Yeah.
Slope.
It's called a slippery slope argument. Yes. Why, Keiko? Because it's like a slippery dip, isn't it? Yeah, it is exactly. If we think of a kid's in the playground, the slippery dip, it's exactly that metaphor. Why? What?
One thing
Explain it.
happens and after another, like a domino thing is happening. That's-
Mhm.
But not necessarily so. No necessity to be like that.
True, yes. It's sort of start one thing and the person says immediately there'll be this sort of cascade, like a waterfall, like or a domino thing, you know, one knock, and then the last one falls. So you start a chain, we call it a chain reaction, and we get to some distant consequence automatically. So there's an automatic connection between, if we think of it like a chain of A to Z. So because we have A, we're going to very quickly go to Z, and it's that Z is always an extreme thing, and it's always extremely negative and scary. So here we have Nazi Germany.
This reminds me of a great China Cultural Revolution. Great leap,
The Great Leap Forward.
yeah,
In China.
just omit or ignore or didn't think about the between different stages,
right.
Just jump,
Yeah.
just breach the nature.
Right. Yeah. I see what you mean.
Right?
Yeah. I get you.
Sort of.
Yeah. It has a similar. It shares similar elements. Yes. That the Great Leap Forward is trying to leap. Is trying to make China leap 30 or 40 years very quickly, isn't it? Without really thinking carefully about all the steps to get to build an industrial society. Yes.
If you take like the nature take this course,
Mm.
won't maybe might not happen,
Mhm.
but here just like it will happen, must happen.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. If nature's more complex, isn't it? And that we might go off in a different
Some
direction.
different elements will interfere with
Yes.
it, but here just very general. How to say that? Very judgmental.
Yeah, and very overly confident that this will happen, isn't it? Very
Or overgeneralized.
probably not overgeneralized because
No,
it's about a
general.
specific. They have a specific target in their mind of a concept, particular. It's quite particular and not general. Like we'll get to Nazi Germany, but it's more about it's a cause and effect chain, and it really the key. I think the easiest explanation is they say A, and they say because A, we will get B, C, D, E, F, G to Z, and Z is automatically going to happen because of A. And like you said, Shane, all those steps in between may not be necessarily connected. That's the key. That they might be connected, and if we ban assault rifles, that we do end up with Nazi Germany, but it would be up to the person who's claiming this to prove that A, banning assault rifles leads to the next step, which leads to the next step, which leads to the next step, which leads to and to Z. Now, if they've got the evidence and all the argument to show that, okay, that's not a fallacy. That would be a valid argument. But to just claim it in this way, A, therefore Z, and they don't provide the intermediate proof, that is a slippery slope. So it's like the metaphor is, the kid on the slippery dip, and there's a certain point, isn't there? If you're just a millimeter further back, you don't go forwards. But if you're a millimeter further forwards, down you go. There's nothing you can do, and within 1 second, you're at the bottom.
Yeah.
And you're helpless on the way down. You automatically go through B, C, D, E, F, G, W, X, Y, Z. Right? then you're on the ground. That's why it's called a slippery slope. Yeah.
Very vivid picture.
Yeah. So lots of slippery slopes, and in a slippery slope, there will always be another fallacy. Again, you know, these things are sort of packaged within each other, or they're in families, like I'm trying to explain with some of them. There is always an appeal to fear, because the Z is always a scary thing. It's fearful, you know, Nazi Germany, or a common one
And it's
used
the
in
last step, I think, the last stage.
Yes,
of
that's
fear.
right. It is
Yes.
a last point, and it's an extreme point.
Yeah.
China will buy Australia.
That's a good
China
one.
will attack
Yes.
nuclear, marine, nuclear, marine,
Marine.
nuclear.
Marine,
Nuclear
submarine,
submarines.
submarine. Ah, yeah. Yeah.
And from Beijing, we should nuclear power plant on Adelaide.
Yeah. Certainly the one about the buying up, the Chinese buying up, is like, yeah, if we let them buy Cubby Creek Station, next thing you know, they'll have all the land in Australia. And we'll all be their slaves or something, you know, that sort of thing. Yes. The other one, it's often used about fear of foreigners. So in that case, you know, there are a few of these sorts of ones circulating about China. The refugee one has been going for some time now, almost 2 decades. If we allow people on boats to arrive in Australia and we accept them, you know, as refugees, then we'll have a flood, millions and millions and millions, and we'll be overwhelmed, and we'll be strangers in our own land, and we've got to defend the country, and you know. So we're at Z straight away. That is what the government is. The government is the favourite and famous phrase of the Liberals was "stop the boats." So they have, for the last over 15 years, used the Navy to stop boats, turn them around, push them back. I was hearing just the other day, they take the petrol out of the engine and leave just enough petrol to get back to Indonesia, things like that. They've got all these tricks. And plus the detention centres and all the rest. But yeah, so, you know, because if we let one boat through, then we'll be overwhelmed with refugees. That's the slippery slope argument, and it's used a lot, and it convinces, you know, quite a lot of people on the right, generally on the right side of politics, and even people in the middle. You know, appeal to fear is a big technique, strategy in politics, isn't it? You know, you can hook quite a few people who are anxious about things. Yeah.
Well, it seems to happen on both sides, in whether left or right or middle, that they use these type of arguments. For example, you know, if we let a lot of people coming in, they take away the jobs. It's another argument, isn't it?
Yeah. That one, however, where does that one sit in the political spectrum?
I thought it was probably centre left.
What do others think about letting well, not just for use beyond refugees, and it's just letting more migrants in. Yeah. So letting too many migrants in, they'll take our jobs.
But isn't that where unions sort of tend to argue?
Some unions do. Some unions, or some sectors of some unions. Yeah.
It's not everybody.
No. But it tends to be a right. It tends to be a right-wing thing. Yeah, and certainly the nationalists and the patriots who say, you know, jobs for Australians and stop migration.
Sometimes, for example, in my country, when they used to say this about Albanians,
right?
But when the Greek, me, for example, I don't like this job, or this job is not for me, or I'm not going for cooking, I'm not going for cleaning. So the Albanian can go to do this. So I would prefer the Albanian. And okay, the point was that the Albanian, it was okay to be paid less, not too much, but it was less. Yes.
Yeah.
So for me, as a businessman, or for someone else, as a farmer, I would prefer to take in my business the Albanian.
Yeah.
I think that happens everywhere. So if the Australian here, they don't want to go to somewhere else to work, someone from another country, it's okay to go because he needs the money, he needs to live.
That's right, and that I think that argument to Silviki is why sometimes some unions do oppose it, isn't it? Because they don't want that undercutting of the wage price. Yeah.
But at the same time, like in Australia specifically, wages are or conditions are pretty well protected though. It's unlike a lot of other countries where there's a lot of differences between, like depending on who employs who, what they pay and what not pay. But here it's theoretically pretty well set, but
yes,
unfortunately it still happens.
But again, everywhere, I think again,
Yes, just like a farm
so
dog.
small groups that still happen everywhere.
Yeah, and there's the whole like the black economy and the cash economy where
Exactly.
people are employed not getting union wages, but then
I think there is responsible. The government is responsible for that small things, but I think again you can't control everything or all these groups everywhere.
Yeah.
In every city or I don't know village or
Well, I think one big problem here is that I think the system is extremely good from that point of view, but I think one of the big problems is that especially from immigrants or students who need to get work in order to extend their visa or get a visa, that they just about do any type of work just to get some to get work.
money.
They work for almost any condition type of thing. And I personally see it far too many times with young people who work hard in shops and are getting paid half of what they should be paid.
Yes, I'm so sorry if I interrupt you, but
No.
they do this because I have experience with visa. The money is too much to pay a visa. Even the student, even the I don't know. For me,
you mean the person
working, so they want to pay
Yeah.
the visa, so they can do everything.
They're desperate to get the job.
Yes, they can do everything in a low with a low. I mean, with money.
Low income.
Low income.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Low wage.
Yes.
And that's the problem, that there's always somebody who's using other people for the work.
I know,
they
because I
shouldn't
do
be.
the same thing.
Yeah,
I do the same thing. I'm not happy.
Is that right? Yeah. Bad.
And I'm doing job with as a black money.
Right.
Some
Under
weekend.
table.
Yeah, not now.
No, yeah.
But when I came, I'm here 1.5 years.
Yeah.
But the first 8 months, I was working like this.
You just had to.
I had to.
Yeah.
I want to live. So.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to survive.
I know.
Very
It's,
common.
It's hard.
it's a
but
catch-22, isn't it?
yeah, but okay.
Yeah, so there's the appeal to fear. There's a lot of things to be anxious about. So this is a common element in political rhetoric, and slippery slope is one of the species of the family, the broader family of an appeal to fear. Yeah, not every appeal to fear has slippery slope element, but some do. Okay, so that running through those 12, hopefully we've clarified a few of the kind of argumentative problems that you can encounter now. We won't do any more of this sort of thing exactly now, but as I mentioned last week, that, and it's at the bottom of that thing, NISCOR. If you Google NISCOR, they've got a good list of about 60 or 70 other fallacies, and they're worth a read, you know.
How do you spell NISCOR?
NIZKOR.
Yeah, I did. And
Didn't come up?
everybody came up with.
Oh, NISCOR's fallacies.
Is it there? I haven't Googled it for ages. Yeah, fallacies,
It's the
NISCOR,
first-
NISCOR.org. Yeah, yeah.
It comes up with.
That's right. It is. It is.
that-
Yeah,
is that
yeah. Now
NISCOR project?
it's Holocaust Educational Resource Project. Yeah, it's part of that website.
Oh.
Yeah, because I
calling
think the people who set it up, because they believe that the far right and Nazism is due to a lack of critical thinking, right? So they don't want the whole, because I think they're Jewish themselves. They don't want the whole Holocaust thing to happen again.
Yeah.
So they're interested in like developing a more critical population. So yes, it is part of a Holocaust education project. Yes. Obviously, it doesn't. These ideas don't have to be linked to that cause, but those people have been motivated by that. Yeah.
Actually, it's really good because it has a description of fallacies
Yeah.
and explain what is fallacy.
Yeah. It'll explain each one quite
And
thoroughly, and then there's usually about half a dozen examples.
Yeah.
Fairly simple
Examples of
examples. Yeah,
fallacies.
and they usually draw them from kind of everyday life. It's like these ones here.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
That's good.
So read 2 or 3 a day, and in a month you'll have a really good toolbox of fallacy identification strategies. Yeah. Or if you've done that
I'm
stuff with
trying
me
to do the
before and you want to.
explanation in Greek to understand
Oh yeah. Well.
exactly what is this because so okay, let me ask you.
It's interesting because most of these were discovered. I think the word would be discovered by the Greeks,
I know.
right? So Socrates, Plato, and the pre-Socratics did it. Aristotle
It's
put
not
put a whole
reasoning
catalogue
or
together.
syllogism.
Syllogism.
After
We
is
say
this?
syllogism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is
yeah.
this
No, it's the lack of it.
okay?
It's exactly the opposite. So Aristotle's syllogism,
Many lawyers.
A, B, therefore
Yes.
C. Yeah.
Yes.
So I don't know if this one if you use this one in Greece, but Socrates is a man. All men are mortal. So Socrates is mortal.
Yes, but we have
Yeah.
3 types of syllogisms.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
There are
But-
other that's
Yeah.
that's
okay.
just, but to give you an example of the basic one. Now they are tightly logical, and there's logical deduction happening with those. So they are best practice. A syllogism is best practice. Fallacies are worst practice because they are not logical. That's the
Okay.
whole point about the fallacy.
Okay.
So, critical thinking involves, it's like any skill, it involves learning what best practice is, and let's try and copy that. But sometimes a good way of learning anything is learn what not to do. Okay, so avoid this and this and this. And that will obviously improve your performance at whatever it is. Cricket,
So
golf,
here,
football, fishing, anything.
in translation says is delusion, fallacy, delusion,
Okay, yeah, now,
or sophism. Fallacy. I'm trying
okay,
to do the
that raises an important language point in English about the word fallacy. It is used 2 ways. Now, it's used the way we're using it here,
claim.
which is a bad form of argument. The form of the argument is wrong. It's not logical. However, probably mainly out in the street, in common language, somebody says, what's an example? people used to believe that the sun went round the earth, but that's a fallacy. The earth goes around the sun. Now, so they're using it meaning a mistaken idea, a false idea, a wrong idea. And that's different. You know, what we're talking about here, we're looking at the form of an argument, isn't it? How logical it is. Now, whether the sun goes around the earth goes around the sun, that is just a fact. One of them's a fact and one of them's an incorrect idea. So you know, out there in the street, the common use of fallacy is more just incorrect idea. But actually, you know, the more correct form of use of the fallacy is what we're doing.
Fallacies are highly related to critical thinking.
Yeah, they are. That's right. Closely related. Yeah. So that is an important point to bring up. You may hear people using or writing and using the term fallacy in a different way from how we are, and it might confuse you. So just to clarify that. Yeah. Good. Well, what we could do, we're halfway through. We'll have a break and then we'll move to that one, the 14 propaganda techniques Fox News uses to brainwash Americans. Now, you know, it's a fairly emotional headline. Brainwashing and so on. We'll talk about what all of that means. But, you know, this is more like analysing media and looking at how the media sometimes use some of these fallacies or certainly illogical techniques to, you know, change people's minds or convince people or keep them thinking a certain way. So this is a more conscious use. You know, we were talking about these two kinds of uses of fallacies, the general unconscious, just mistaken one. This is the more conscious, tricky, crafty kind of thing. Yeah. So how, and let's not just focus on Fox News, you know, we'll, as we look at each example, we'll open it up for general discussion, and you might be able to think of other examples you've seen on the media and things like that. So it'll be a discussion of media and critical analysis of media and the emotional techniques of persuasion that they use. Yeah. Shall we? It's 6:30, isn't it, by the play school clock? So let's wait 10 minutes, go and have a coffee or a tea or a whatever, walk outside, and we'll see you in 10. What is it now? It's 6:31. So see you at 6:41, guys, on the Zoomers. Right. Catch you then.
So what happened to your system here? Your computer,
okay.
your
My
TV?
my computer is crook. It's not well.
Okay.
It's in hospital getting a new battery. Just getting a new battery. Nothing serious.
Okay.
And he's blaming his grandson.
Yeah. Who wants a coffee?
Yes,
Okay.
I'll have one in a minute.
And a coffee? Good quality?
I'm from Greece and I don't drink coffee at all.
That is crazy. I don't
That
believe,
is
I don't
crazy.
believe you agree.
Exactly. No one believes me.
Shana, would you like a coffee?
Thank you.
No? Peko?
No, thank you.
Can I please ask you a word?
Yes.
This one, fluidity, gender fluidity.
Oh, fluidity. Okay.
Fluidity.
Yeah. So, you know, in this is a collocation, gender fluid. So fluidity is like fluid, it flows, right?
Over that.
Yeah. So gender fluidity. So in the traditional, you're a man, you're a woman, nothing in between.
Unity.
Yeah, it could be unisex, transsexual, you know, gay, all the possible different genders that exist now. Some people say I'm no gender at
What
all.
do you think about
Putin rails against cancel culture. Okay, so Putin is on the right, and generally the right don't like gender fluidity. They like men and women.
What do you think?
Yeah, well, on the left are okay about people redefining gender how they want to, and things being fairly fluid. So the left generally are for gender fluidity. If that's what someone wants, what's the big deal?
Okay.
Yeah,
And
that's a general left position. Yeah.
so is there any certain pattern? For example, just now I used the wrong collocation, close related. Sometimes I heard highly, blah blah blah.
Oh yeah, there are
Or
highly.
strongly.
Yes,
or-
yes, there are.
So is there any pattern? Which
Not really.
Which
It's,
is
no, it'd be hard to say there's a pattern. That's the thing about collocations. They often don't follow patterns, do they? Closely related, highly
from my point
highly
of view.
intelligent.
From my point of view, if I
Yeah.
can handle them properly, appropriately, that means my English will
Absolutely.
go to another level.
Yeah.
Oh,
And if you could find a pattern, that would be a really good idea. Yeah, we know, as we know, we used it all the time. We have used it a lot. Just the word will show you what the collocations are. Is there a pattern? For example, if you put, and because I've got my computer, you can't do it, but if you put highly and just see all the different highly intelligent, highly probable, highly highly likely. So there's two, highly probable and highly likely. There's a probability. We talk about high and low probability. That's just a little micro pattern. Closely related, closely allied, closely followed, closely imitated, closely.
I've got a lot highly abstract, highly accurate, highly complex, potential, detail.
Yeah, now highly. Okay, I think the way to do it is to think of the metaphor behind it. If we think of relate, you said relate. Now related is about
Close
one
relationship.
thing, yeah, that's right. One thing, a person or a thing, and another thing. And the metaphor is distance, isn't it? If we're close friends and then we grow more distant, we grow further apart, or various expressions in English about physical distance. So therefore, if one topic is not highly related, highly is up and down, isn't it? But we're thinking of a horizontal metaphor here, how close. So relationships are horizontal. So therefore we use close. And we use it about friendships, close friends, distant friends, relatives, close relative, distant relative. So there is a pattern. It's about the metaphor, and that is a horizontal metaphor.
So relationship is related to the distance.
That's right.
But
Horizontal
I use
horizontal
higher.
distance. That's right.
High, that means high.
Yeah,
Something
that's
related to
right.
high.
Yeah. So if you think of all of those things on that list, they are all scales, aren't they? Give me one off the list.
Highly abstract.
Okay, so abstract is about something on the ground, physical, and then we pull it up kind of into the clouds and it gets more and more abstract. So it's up and down, isn't it? And because it's up and down, then we use high and low.
And horizontal.
Yeah. Yeah. So we use high and low for abstract. Give me another one off that list.
Highly flexible. Flexible.
Flexible. Okay, so this is a bit trickier, but if we got different objects, okay. That's quite flexible. So I'll give that 9, I'll give that 9 out of 10, right? That I'll give 0. So again, it's a vertical, it's a scale. And most scales, think of temperature, 30 degrees, 10 degrees, it's vertical, up and down, isn't it? So therefore, anything that involves a scale, you have a look at that list, all characteristics that are on a scale where you could give a quantity rating, they will tend to be vertical, and therefore we say high and low.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
This side is numbers.
that's right, graph. You're like, it's like a y-axis, isn't it, and an
Graph.
x-axis. Yeah. So there's the pattern.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I only just worked that out.
John,
Yeah.
what is this down there on the ground, on the floor?
Huh?
What is this on the floor? The pictures,
Ah,
no, not here. How do you say this?
These are posters.
They're posters.
Or it's not quite banner. When you carry them in a demonstration, that's a banner.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, what is it?
So, what do you reckon? That's some electoral guy. Labour Party. These people are not
Okay.
Labour here. They're just using it.
Okay. No war in China.
Thanks, Matt.
Do you have war in China?
Because it will happen, it's predicted.
So they are all connected. They are all related. Those 3 signs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a because recently it started from the summer rain, just now I mentioned, because
Sorry, it's just
Australia?
a war between Australia
because
or China with Australia?
Australia partner up with America and British. That's AUKUS. Australia, UK, US. So and Australia will build a submarine and with the Britain and the USA's help. And British support, USA provide the skill or the device or something. But still a plan. But now sounds or feel like it happened already. Maybe 20 or 30 years it will maybe built, will be built.
Oh, yeah,
It
it's
will be
long
finished. Yeah,
time.
but
It
now
has happened
it's-
immediately.
yeah. Lots of debates around.
Is that scare threat to
Yeah.
China?
That's why.
Why?
Because it's
Yeah.
here as the space of the pack, and then of course China, because China has nuclear weapon, of course will target at that. That's why
It's a bit
they
of
are
jumping on
worried.
launching. Okay.
If really the war happened, of course China won't attack the USA first. Attack here.
Because it's
China will
easy
use the
target.
cherry picking. Oh no, just like my president picking.
Cherry picking.
Yeah.
Australia is a
Yeah.
person.
Yeah, because
Okay.
America is a very, very hard shell. Yeah, the president. But Australia, the shell very, very
It's soft.
fragile. Yeah, inside very
Plants.
ruined.
Milk?
Oh, yeah.
That's fresh. I got it today.
Oh, man,
Yeah.
you're awesome. Thank you.
Tell me when.
That's good. Thank you.
Uh,
Perfect. Yeah, I checked on the milk. It's still
Yeah.
September.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I brought some in from home.
Oh, good man.
So
what-
can
so
you
what-
tell
so
me
what-
the meaning of pack?
Yes, I'll just connect up with the Zoomers, and then it's useful for the Zoomers to talk about this as well.
I looked at.
Hi Zoomers, we're back. G'day. Sorry, we've been chatting, and one thing we've been chatting about
Army up
to just
Taiwan.
we've got
And the Philippines
I
Sea.
don't
a
think
couple of
I-
people joining. We've got Jane. Hello,
Hey, John, I
Yes.
just spoke to one of my friends, like WeChat. She's my very close girlfriend. She lives in China. She's a radiologist. She's interesting to see what we're doing. So I said, I gave the Zoom ID. I said I would talk to John, and then she wants to just come in and then have a look what we're talking about.
That's Jane. Oh, good. Welcome, Jane. All from China. Fantastic.
Hi, Jing. Yeah, I think that's her, but it's not. Okay,
Isn't it?
she hasn't got in, so this is not the
Okay.
one.
Okay. Well, welcome, Jane, and hopefully your friend will come too. Welcome back, all Zoomers. We are doing some critical thinking, and in the break, because we're in this centre is called the Activist Centre. So if you look around, you'll see posters about all sorts of topics. So just some examples. There's a union one there. Free West Papua, so that's the area west of New Guinea, independence movement. There's Muhammad Ali making an anti-Vietnam War statement. There's an anti-nuclear one, aged care. There's Women Unite, there's a feminist banner, right? So there's all these different groups. There's our environmental group, climate action. So all these different groups work here. They just come in and use the space to make banners and on posters. So what somebody has, there's been a demonstration in the last, these have been here for a couple of weeks. And people we were just talking about these in the break, and there are 3. So shall we have a look at them? We got no nuclear subs, tear up the AUKUS pact, no war on China. Okay, so we're just trying to figure out what they mean, what are they about. So we can discuss these for a few minutes if you like, because it is obviously, it's an important issue, certainly in Adelaide, and certainly to people of Chinese background, of which there are some in the group, and I think everybody really. But so what's it about? It's an issue that's arisen in the last month only. And, you know, this group has responded fairly quickly. Any thoughts about what is it about? What's the simplest one to take first? This one, no nuclear subs. What's that about? I mean, these are all linked. They're all part of the same issue, but we'll start unpacking the issue by looking at that one. No nuclear subs. What's happened in Adelaide in the last month?
Adelaide issue, not all Australia,
It is all of Australia, but it's also related particularly to Adelaide.
because they're going to build in Adelaide.
That's right. They're going to build nuclear submarines in Adelaide. Yeah. So the previously existing arrangement with submarines was what?
It's a what they call conventional one use diesel.
Yes,
oil,
correct.
not
Yeah.
nuclear submarine.
With our famous friends.
Yeah.
Exactly, with France, wasn't it? $90 billion contract over many years with France to build submarines.
But it's scrapped.
That's right. The Liberal government threw out the contract and have signed up with who? To build nuclear ones.
US?
Yes, with the US and who else?
Did you say? Yeah.
Britain, right. So they've they've torn up the contract where the French were very annoyed, and their ambassador flew back to Paris, like ambassadors do when one country really offends another one. I mean, that's the most, apart from war, you know, that's one of the most serious things you can do, isn't it? Is recall your ambassador.
But I really doubt it's true. But 1 week after he flew back.
That's right. They come back.
So why would you have holiday
Yeah.
with his family?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe they just play just on the stage. We just
Yeah, kind of. It's a symbolic. It is a symbolic act, isn't it?
He was homesick.
Yeah. Yeah. So the French were, you know, you can understand, you know, their annoyance at it. $90 billion down the drain, and they were already, I think, $400 million they'd already spent. So that's gone. And there were several hundred French families in Adelaide. I know some of them personally. My French language exchange partner is going in the 15th of December. I've got no one to practice French with anymore because they're going home because of this. So I'm right behind this protest. Okay, so that's no nuclear subs. So saying let's not have nuclear submarines, you know, because this is linked with the general anti-nuclear movement in Australia, which has a long history for various reasons.
Are they supporting just conventional submarine to build new type of conventional, not new?
Probably the people who have written that sign don't want submarines built at all. They're part of a general anti-militaristic drive, right? But the nuclear is obviously next step up again in expense and also in war threat to China, right? So it increases the tensions with China, hence no war with China, no war on China, right? Because, and that's what this is related to, you tear out the AUKUS. Now, so we were just looking at who's involved in this new submarine deal. It's AU, Australia. Australia, sorry, UK and USA. So we get AUKUS. It's called the AUKUS. Now, a pact is an agreement, like a contract. Yeah. So tear up. So throw it out, you know, get rid of it. So they're anti this new development because, and it's, you know, a lot of people do see it as a rise, an escalation in the preparation towards war or certainly conflict of various forms, you know, tension with China. So yeah, the anti, what, war with China? Hard to know, isn't it? I mean, the Taiwan issue is increasing in its intensity, and certainly the US is making more and more noise against China, and Australia is generally, as it usually does, it tends to follow what the US does.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think the fact that...
And USA, of course, is waiting many years now to do it.
Yeah, and the fact that I think that this thing shows how dependent Australia is on the United States, because you've got a $90 billion contract with a country. That's a very serious commitment. Now, why does Australia just tear that up and go with the US? There's obviously behind the scenes, there's enormous pressure by the United States on Australia to say, tear up that with the French and use our weapon system and integrate more with us, or else we will do this. And we don't know what that is, but there would have been a lot of threat about we'll stop buying your wheat, or, you know, it'd be various trade war threats. It will be, we won't supply you with the new F-53 35 fighters or whatever, we don't know what that is, but, you know, why did countries get permanently dependent on others? You know, it's a system of threat and carrot and stick, isn't it? You know, so we don't know what deals went on, but there's been a lot of pressure, a lot. The US is really increasing its pressure on China enormously. And it wants Australia as part of that. And as I've said, you know, to some people who have been kind of interested in it, go and read. Oh, it's Jin, is it? Hey, Jin, how are you? Good to see you. Google the project for the new American century, because that goes back to the beginning of the 21st century. And there's a bunch of people called the neocons, the neoconservatives, they're known as the neocons. And many of them put together a report, the project for the new American century, which was all about the fact that the Soviet Union had been defeated by 1990 roughly. The conservative Americans, this group in particular, said, we never want to have another competitor like the Soviet Union again. We spent trillions of, literally trillions, you know, defeating them. We are now the unilateral power around the world. There's no one who equals us. That's it. Yeah, Wikipedia, project for the new American century. You will find if you want to really investigate, there's a whole report that they wrote and gave it to George Bush Jr. at the time. William Crystal and Richard Perlman and others, they are behind this whole thing. Basically, they said, we want to be, you know, kings of the earth forever. Now we've defeated the Soviet Union. We want it to stay this way, that America's dominant. And it was in the 90s. And they said, we want to keep it this way. And the only way we can keep it this way is to stop other rising competitors. And the main competitor is China. So what we need to do is we need to reorient our entire economic and military strategy around the containment of China. And what that will mean, because it was the future then, is we need to get all those troops that we've put in Western Europe and all those aircraft carriers and things, because they were always worried about the Soviet Union heading west, right, into Europe. That's no longer necessary. So they'd spent 50 years building military infrastructure and training people, and, you know, trillions of dollars and putting nuclear missiles all over that side of the world. What we have to do is we have to swing right around the other side of the world, and we have to start putting all our aircraft carriers in the Pacific, in the South China Sea, the Indian Ocean. We need to put military bases more in the Philippines, because some of those got removed, and notice they're back now, like Clark Air Base got decommissioned, but now it's back. That's part of this project. The invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq were all part of this, get into Central Asia and surround China on the Western side. You know, stronger links with Japan, more military presence and deals with Korea and Australia as well. Australia's a pivotal key part, if you think of the geography. It's located in a really key part of South Asia, right? And, you know, the other thing is the US manipulate leaders in many countries. They've done it in Australia. The example I've mentioned a few times is, you know, Kevin Rudd, who spoke Chinese, from what I understand from Chinese people, pretty well, certainly better than most Anglo-Aussies anyone knows. He was diplomat there. He knew the culture and the language. He's prime minister. He wanted to increase ties with China. The US were very concerned about this. They organised within the Labor Party people to get rid of Kevin Rudd and vote in Julia Gillard. Within a few days of Julia Gillard being voted in, she passed a legislation allowing US soldiers to be permanently based on Australian soil for the first time since World War II in Darwin, right? They're there now. And I was in Darwin 2 weeks ago watching a TV program about how they're going to expand that. And they're going to have, I can't remember, 3 or 4 times more Marines now and much bigger facilities, right? So that was a US manoeuvre at the highest level in Australia, changing prime ministers to make sure that the US got a physical military presence in Australia. Now, all of that does tie back to this strategic plan, long-term plan, the project for the new American century, to be the dominant figure. Now, that is going, for them, it's going horribly wrong because China is rising despite all their efforts and, all their attempts at containment. China is economically and militarily, and technologically doing very, very well. And so that tension is increasing and increasing. And Australia, as I say, is part of this orientation to put US military forces all around the area. We are part of this. And this submarine project is very much part of it as well, right? And therefore, not for the first time, but in a big way, Adelaide, little old Adelaide, has suddenly become very, very central in the military build-up process. So, that I think that's how to see why is Adelaide involved in this? Well, okay, first of all, Australia is involved because if you think in World War II, in terms of the expanding Japanese empire, Australia was a major continental base from which the Americans used for all their resupply and used the ports, especially on the East Coast and Darwin, for the big naval battles of the Coral Sea and the Midway and all those things that, partly helped defeat the Japanese Empire. So Australia proved very important in the Japan-US war. So the Americans...
The north part.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm just, first of all, explaining the importance of Australia generally. Adelaide has got an interesting military history. And it goes back to just after World War II, it's actually related to satellites, because when they wanted to watch the Soviet Union, what they need to do is put up geostationary satellites, right? So those satellites that just sit over one spot of the Earth, they don't move. They're at a certain distance and speed, they just stay there. So then it means you can just watch things, and also it means you can send signals around. So I've had this explained to me by a guy, his name is Richard Tonkin, and interestingly, he owns a pub, and it's quite a famous pub in Adelaide. It's the most famous musical pub. As you go down Port Road, opposite the entertainment centre, is the what the hell's it called? I've just had a blank. It's that hotel there on opposite on the other side. It'll come to me later. But all the new independent musical bands and so on, they all play there. He runs that pub. But his side interest is military intelligence, strangely, and military history and so on. And he occasionally is part of these anti-war demonstrations. He presented a talk once. He basically said, and it makes a lot of sense, South Australia has had a few interesting military experiences. The atomic bombs of the 1950s, I think there were 6 of them that were exploded in the desert. Where was that? South Australia. The rocket and missile testing in Woomera, which is sort of halfway out to the border in the outback, and these are all in the desert, right? That's the main missile testing place, right? Why South Australia? Because, and also Naranga, so Woomera became a very important US and British military centre. And then Adelaide became the main logistical supplier to those nuclear testing places. So Adelaide developed a whole lot of weapons research industry, and that's out Salisbury Elizabeth Way. There's a lot out there. There's a place called Weapons Research Centre. And today we have large international corporations like BAE, British Airways, what are they called? BAE, what does it stand for? British Aerospace, AE is aerospace, British Aerospace. Halliburton is another big group. Kellogg Brown and Root is their company name here in Adelaide. They're on Green Hill Road. One of the biggest companies behind the Iraq War and providing material for the Iraq War. They have helped build the railway, the North-South Railway to Darwin. They're linked with that because that's a very important military logistic thing. If the Americans and Australians ever wanted to get military stuff up and down the country, it's going to go up and down that railway. And going up and down that railway gets you up near Woomera and Pine Gap. Pine Gap is just outside Alice Springs, the most important CIA base, which I've mentioned before. Now, the point is, and this is what Richard Tongan says, you know, if you look at the planet, these things are on an almost vertical line. So you got Adelaide, Woomera, Alice Springs, and so on. Now, basically that's because we have geostationary satellites directly above this point on the Earth, because if you divide the Earth in three, you have geostationary satellites over.
What is geos?
Geostationary means a satellite that just doesn't move. It sits in the sky.
The satellites?
The satellite, yeah. It just sits in the sky and doesn't move. I mean, it does go round the Earth, but it goes round the Earth once every 24 hours, right?
Yeah.
So it stays still relative to the surface of the Earth. So these are important military satellites. So there are some above the UK, there are some above America, another third of the way around the world. And where is the other third? The other third point is exactly here in Adelaide.
Really?
Right? Yeah. And that's and you know, the Australian continent is the friendly continent to UK and US. And Adelaide was the nearest capital city that's closest to this axis point of longitude. Right, so, but yeah, back in the 50s, they decided Adelaide was going to be the US and the UK, a major military strategic logistic point where, you know, it was from there that the missile stuff was going to, experimentation was going to happen, the nuclear weapons were going to happen. I mean, they could have done it with Perth because it's, you know, it's desert out there too, but they did it with Adelaide because they wanted to have stations like Narunga and Pine Gap all on that one axis, and that is supplied by the railway line that runs from Adelaide to Alice Springs, right? And now it runs to Darwin, so it can support the Darwin Marines, right? So this railway line that runs north-south through the centre of Australia is incredibly important militarily. And therefore, at the southern end, they're building, you know, the Adelaide has become this major military kind of centre, which a lot of us don't notice, you know, day to day. You drive along Green Hill Road and you could Google it, Kellogg Brown and Root. Now, you know, they are a notoriously, what could we say, criminal company that partly ran the Iraq War and made billions out of it, literally billions. So, for example, when a Marine goes to Iraq, they have to go to the toilet. So Halliburton supply all the toilets, and they supply all the kitchenware, and they supply all the housing and the beds and the, you know, all that, not the weapons, but all that back-end infrastructure, and also the railway systems and transport and, you know, that kind of stuff. So, but they're famous in the US for overcharging. So for one portable toilet, they'll charge the US $1 million for it, the US government, right, and get it. Because the famous Vice President, Dick Cheney, was previously head of Halliburton before he became the Vice President, right? So he has these links. So through the revolving door, the company gets the money, right? Now that's Kellogg Brown and Root, who are in Adelaide here. And if you know, you drive on Green Hill Road, you don't know, it looks like a nice sparkly office, you know. But that's the kind of thing they're up to. And, you know, they have a lot of power and commercial power and political power. So Adelaide has this history that I'd say most Adelaideans haven't put all the bits together, like a lot of the anti-war activists who, you know, that's their interest, that's their concern. They've got these histories, and I'm repeating it to you now in summarized form, right? No one's written a book, as far as I know, but on Adelaide and its history, but there's probably a book that needs to be done by Richard Tonkin. He'd be the best person. Yeah. So this latest development of submarines is, you know, to put this in historical context, it's just the last in a long line of military developments in South Australia. But it is a serious one because, you know, when we're talking about nuclear, it's obviously, the point is being made, these are nuclear-powered submarines, not nuclear-armed. But as many people have pointed out, the nuclear-powered submarine, it doesn't take long to just quickly refit them for nuclear weapons. So in the event of a conflict, it's quite possible, almost probable, that they would be, you know, within a week or something, they'd be refitted with nuclear weapons.
It's almost silly not to believe that.
Yeah, because if you're engaged in nuclear war, nuclear submarines are incredibly important because they're the silent threat, aren't they? They're in a nuclear conflict, or, you know, the nuclear conflict is happening now in the sense that you know, it's not just the use of it, it's the threat of it. That's part of the conflict. That's part of the use of a nuclear weapon. Perhaps most of its use is its threat. So part of its threat is the unknowability of it. So nuclear submarines are the best thing in that respect. They are the most unknown. Like the Chinese would know where all the nuclear weapons silos are in America, the fixed land ones, you know, the ones, the intercontinental ballistic missiles. They probably know all of those. But what the Americans want up their sleeve are the submarines. They could be anywhere. There could be one 20 kilometres from Tokyo. There could be one off Hawaii. There could be one off Queensland. There could be one in the Indian Ocean. You know, you want to keep it really quiet and really secret. And it's the nuclear submarines that are the really, really quiet ones. Diesel are not as quiet and they're more detectable. Yeah. That's right. Think of Heinz's four-wheel drive.
Yeah.
Chug, 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 chug. Right.
Yeah, he's coming.
What you need, Heinz, is a nuclear-powered
Yes,
full
yeah.
Toyota.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, maybe that's the next thing.
Yeah, maybe. So, you know, it's a big jump. It's a big escalation of threat if somewhere, I mean, America already has these submarines. It's not like they're totally new, but they're building more of them here, right? So the point is, if you're getting targeted by nuclear submarines, then you're probably, if you've got nuclear weapons, it's reasonably likely, it's not inevitable, we can't say for sure, it's a secret, isn't it? Like that China will at some point put Adelaide on the nuclear target list. It's more probable, at least, than before. When we were building noisy old Collins-class submarines, chug, 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 all right, you know, it's a threat, but it's not quite the same. Now there's this more super weapon, if you like. They would be more concerned and they'd be more motivated to target it. We can't say absolutely for sure, but it increases the probability. It's a bit like, again, the map and back to the Cold War, the CIA base that's outside Alice Springs, Pine Gap, it's the most important CIA base. It's the most important American base outside of America because it picks up all the satellite signals over the Soviet Union, it would still be monitoring Russia, but now China. So all of those satellites that go over Asia and, all the other US enemies, Iran and, even its allies, India, it monitors all the telephone conversations, everything, all right? Now, that information, as I was explaining before, it can't go directly to the United States. It's too far over the horizon, even for satellites. It has to come, they beam it to Pine Gap, just outside Alice Springs, to this central access point that I was describing before. So it goes to a geostationary satellite over Pine Gap, over Adelaide, or, that line. It then goes down to Pine Gap. The information gets processed, all the rubbish, somebody's son-in-law has failed an exam, or who cares about that? That bit doesn't go, but the fact that they've moved some weapon, from Vladivostok 10 miles south, yes, that does. So they process it in Pine Gap, and then they send that to CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, just outside of Washington. That's the process. Now, back in the Soviet Union days, you wanted to hit your enemy's eyes and ears with nuclear weapons, obviously, fairly early, wouldn't you? Well, Pine Gap is an obvious, it's the most important base outside of the US. It was almost certainly a nuclear target by the Russians. Okay, the conflict switched to China. It is almost certainly a target by, the Chinese military. It would just, if you didn't target it, you'd be a military idiot, Now, we could, there are other US bases. There's a major one, the map up there, I think even might show it. That's nuclear and uranium. But if you look on the far western Australian coast, there's a major signal tower there that sends long frequency waves. Submarines that are silent, nuclear submarine, they need very long wavelength radio signals, quite special ones. So there's a Northwest Cape, there's a base out there, American base, that sends those signals to the American submarines in the Indian Ocean. So again, if you wanted to disorient the submarines, you knock that base out. That was always considered a nuclear target. The Soviets probably, had that as a nuclear target. Naranga, which was in South Australia, on that line I was talking about, it was near Woomera. That got removed when the Cold War finished. It hasn't been put back. So that's -1. But, the US has 800 bases in the world, around the world, and we've got several. I'm not sure of the exact number. I mean, obviously Darwin's a military base, Townsville, etc. But there are others, okay? So Adelaide, with this submarine development, is increasing its involvement with the US. And therefore it's likely to be a nuclear target, just like, Pine Gap and other places. Previously, we probably weren't. And, we probably aren't right at the moment because this project hasn't started. But if and when it does, and still possibly an if, because not everybody, there might be a bit of a political fight about it, but the Labor Party isn't opposing it very strongly. Because, as I said, the US have influenced the Labor Party a lot to the Labor Party put the US Marines in Darwin, They're pretty close to the US alliance. The Greens, as we move further left, you get more people who disagree with the US alliance. So the Greens are against the whole submarine thing. And then obviously socialist groups who are very small, they're all dead against it.
So can I ask you something else? So
Yeah.
how the Australian government explained the submarines? So I mean, I don't know
Good
if you
point.
understand.
Yeah.
So for protection from who?
Yeah, pretty much protection. Yeah. Yeah, and again, that's an interesting point, because you've got to convince the Australian population that, well, we're going to tear up a $90 billion deal, and we're going to go for something else, and we've got to make it make sense to
Yes.
25 million people. Yeah.
It's
So you
logical
do.
to think that it's for a war or for something big. I don't know.
Yeah. So to do that, you've got to have done some preparation before that,
Yeah,
don't
of
you?
course.
Emotional preparation. Yeah.
exactly.
So there has been talk of, there has actually been some government ministers who have talked about war with China and said the phrase was, the drums of war with China are now beating. Yeah.
Okay.
So that was said 6 months ago or so. Yeah. So there's been this increase in the rhetoric and the language. And as you might know, Morrison has said, we need more investigation into Wuhan and the lab leak and all that sort of thing. And, going
So
along
they
with
started
Trump.
to prepare the population for something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like this.
That's right. And so the whole Trump thing about the lab leak, Morrison went along with that very, very strongly. That's when the Chinese began to really get offended and started to cut the trade with Australia, as a form of retaliation. So, the barley, and then it's become the wine, and now they're apparently advising students not to come, and so on and so forth. So the tensions on both sides are increasing, and with that tension, there's more what we were talking about earlier, appeal to fear.
Yeah.
And when you've got the population sufficiently afraid, then you can say, hey, we've got a solution. We'll build nuclear submarines and the Americans will come and help us. So, yeah, you're just making me think, and it's all just speculation. A lot of this, isn't it? It's like
strategy.
I wonder whether Scott Morrison going along with the whole Wuhan lab thing and purposely, you're going to cause anger from China and then get into a state of tension you can't really undo. Why would you do that? Maybe it was planned a long time ago that, we get into this state of tension and fear, and then a nuclear submarine plan, more Marines in Darwin, etc. Oh, China has answered quite a lot. Yes, they have said a lot about increasingly aggressive talk, and this needs to stop, and they've imposed various trade bans. Yes. Oh, yes. They've complained quite a lot about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So either side, both sides have been increasing the tension. But if I start thinking that, I just have to kind of, if we're talking about critical thinking, you kind of have to be careful, don't you? And think, am I starting to go too far into conspiracy here? Unless there's proof. That did Scott Morrison purposely, start that aggressive cycle because the Americans wanted him to? That's my point.
That's a good point, because it's very easy to offend China, to provoke China, and China will respond, and you justify whatever you want to do, a submarine or whatever, because China is getting angry at us. They're going to fight. They're going to start a war. So, and no Western country will criticize you if you pick on China.
Yeah, true. That's true. And there was the recent conference, wasn't there, in the UK, clearly, with a lot of the Western countries, which Scott Morrison went to, where, a lot of the sort of, anti-Chinese strategies were, I think Anna's joining us again. G'day. Yeah, where the these anti-Chinese strategy, it was basically AUKUS, same mob, Australia, UK, US, plus Western Europe, pretty much discussing, how do we contain China? Same thing again, yeah. So they are, you're right, they're all pretty much in agreement.
And I found something very interesting is
Yeah.
very rare for me to, because I watched some YouTube, some commentators. I found all of their opinions towards China is all negative. I barely hear someone like you, Anglo-Australian, Aussie, talk in a objective way about analyzing this, because whenever I watch the videos all about how China is being aggressive, you know, how China is sending the aircraft to Taiwan, how China is going to whatever, but it's all on one side, which is very strange. It looks like China has never got a supporter or anything at all.
Yeah.
It's like, for me, it's like we are playing, like the Western are playing cancel culture on Chinese and China. When we talk about cancel culture, this is a left-wing thing, but in China issues, cancel culture is playing on both sides. If you, whether you are left-wing or right-wing, anything, when you talk about China, you should pick negative towards Chinese or China. Including the party, right? And if you say anything positive, you can't, you have no platform to express your interest. You can't say anything positive, but there is there are lots of like platform for you to say something negative. You are welcome to say, well, you are welcome to criticize anything about China, whatever good or bad, right? But if you say something good or something positive, you're done.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah,
when we talk about cancel culture, I was like, it's not a left wing or right wing thing. You can exercise on what kind of anything. Any party.
Yeah. That's right, and it relates sort of to the things we were looking at, the fallacies where it's a kind of cherry picking, isn't it? Where you just pick cherries of purely one side, and all those other ones that might show the positive side, and therefore increase the whole complexity of the thing. And so there's not a black and white thing. We're not allowed to. We're cancelled. Not to cherry pick, then you're cancelled.
And especially when we're talking about like the things that we Western culture that we cherish the most, like freedom of speech, right? If you're talking about, if you criticize Chinese, that's freedom of speech. But if you say something like positive, no. You are whatever to say. I watched the ABC program Think Twice on the weekend. I just forgot the words. You can't say anything like positive. If you say anything positive, no matter what, the freedom of speech is not suitable.
Apply to you.
Apply to you. Yes. And it's now it's this kind of like situation. So we just like, okay, anything, whatever I go, even though like in like friends gathering or something, I will just make fun of myself. Anything bad, I'm Chinese, so it just become. But this is when we make fun of each other in friends gathering or like in workplace. So doesn't apply this, but it just like it give me this kind of like experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it raises a number of issues. I mean, that one, Western so-called liberal democracies who pride themselves on this freedom of speech, we might have it in law. Oh yes, theoretically you can get up and you can say anything. But institutionally and culturally, and that might even come down to the level of barbecues with friends, those freedoms don't actually exist. So, you know, what we're seeing at the moment, I think, is that kind of thing where the right, you know, because of their control and ownership, control, influence over those institutions, and therefore the creation of the culture that those institutions create, like the media, education systems, et cetera, parliaments, they will create the kind of culture you're talking about where it becomes unacceptable to say certain things. And, you know, if we go back to the 70s, say, and, you know, for a woman to say at a golf club like my mother, you know, well, actually, I don't want Mrs. Philip John Rice put on the trophy that I won. I want my name. I want Marjorie Helen Rice, even like it's still my father's surname, you know. But I'm just an example, right? In terms of feminism, there was a whole, that was outrageous. You couldn't say that. You'd be cancelled, you know. And she got cancelled. I'm just picking one example. So it could be an environmental thing, could be feminist, could be anything, you know. The right have allowed this freedom of speech because they pretty much, until social media came along, they pretty much owned bloody everything, right? And if you had an alternate view, number one, where could you say it? You have to physically, you know, get out before even photocopying. I remember some of us would be old enough to remember, wouldn't we? No photo. You have to actually physically kind of print something and hand it out, you know. So, mind you, Rosa Parks did that. Rosa Parks in America, when she refused to move to the back of the bus because she was black, and she said, "No, I'm sitting at the front." And she went, and the bus driver refused to drive her. And I'm just telling the story because it's a very famous moment in American history, and because everything was separated, blacks on certain part of the bus, drinking from certain fountains, only going to certain restaurants, you know, it was apartheid. Yeah. So in the 50s. Now, she broke that, and then she went home and told people, and interestingly, her friends were a bunch of English teachers, and they had access to these, they used to call them Roneo, you know. So they wrote a little thing about, we're going to boycott all the buses. And they churned out, like by hand that night, hundreds of leaflets, and they spread them around Montgomery, and that began the bus boycott that then exploded across America and, you know, changed human rights. So the point is that, you know, sometimes the people do get hold of something that spreads and goes viral, but it's obviously, it's easier now than it was. But, you know, that's an exception. And usually the rulers and the owners rule and own culture. And that includes what you're saying, Jin, cancel culture and the rules about what's acceptable to say and what's not. And certain boundaries will get created just almost unconsciously. And yeah, you start to say that stuff, people are like, what, are you a communist or something, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, so because you think that the Chinese are managing COVID very well, and you support the way the party is doing that, that must mean that you're in favour of locking up all the Uyghur people in West Xinjiang. Gee, I'm not going to speak to you. You're not coming to my barbecue again. You know, I mean, those kind of connections do get made. It's all or nothing. It's black and white. It's the false dilemma that we've talked about, and it's the cherry picking, you know. And these complexities, they just get ignored. And as countries build up the tensions, these tolerances get less and less. And there's more and more cancelling, I'd say, that we're going to see ahead of us. I don't know. Do you think so, Jen? Do you think we're going to see more of this? Or?
Yeah.
What's your feeling about, it's an interesting point that I like the use of the word, I haven't heard it before in relation to this issue, the cancel culture, because it usually is a term by the right used against the left, and in a sense, you're redirecting it. What's your experience of that, the strength of it, and how it's built up? Has it been over, have you seen it doing it over many years or just very suddenly, or tell the group about, and others might like to join in, especially those with Chinese background, like
It's just like
developing
very
like-
recently, like.
culture. Jin, you might need, let's take a step back. Can you explain, because you're quite politically adept with your language, can you explain what cancel culture is and give the group some other examples of what that is, so that we get the concept, and then we'll see how you're reinterpreting it.
Cancel culture, actually cancel culture, I think like it happens in 60s last century when Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the activities by the time. There is, I think that the first cancel culture happened in USA in 60s. There was artist by the time, and he stood up for the anti-Vietnam War, and by the time he got cancelled. The term say cancel means he can't get any contract. He can't produce any movie by the time, because the government and just didn't give him this platform, so he can't have any. He basically lost his job, and he can't play anything by the time. So that's the cancel culture start. And these days, I'm not sure if someone like remember like J.K. Rowling.
Yes.
Harry Potter. Yes. Last year or I think last year or 2 years ago, she made a very rude or very like uneducated comment about transgender. And
Yeah.
and as we know, like
just to remind people, J.K. Rowling is the author of Harry Potter books.
Yeah, Harry Potter. Yes, yeah. And she made this very like stupid comment about transgender, and then like all you know like at this, we're in like 21st century. It's not like 60s or 70s last century. Now these days we have like very open opinion or open heart for like everyone. So her comment actually like made lots of people angry.
Yeah.
And by the time in Google, when you type J.K. Rowling, the first search came out was, does J.K. Rowling still get money from Harry Potter movie or Harry Potter books? So what I'm saying was, people are very angry, so they cancel J.K. Rowling. How to cancel? Stop buying her book. Stop buying her book. And there is she won an award from a charity. I forgot the name. And because people are very angry, so the whole social media flood with like all negative comments about her. It means like, he made just one sentence she speak about transgender, but all the effort, all the good words she did are totally erased from this planet. So and all these negative comments forced her to like, she returned her award, and the charity who got millions dollars from her have to like stand up and say, oh no. Her opinion is her own opinion, doesn't represent our charity, and they have to like cut the line, right? Push her away, and no matter how she did, how she contribute to the charity. So she lost a contract, and then she have to apologize so many times again, and people and they say I want to say that when people search in Google that if does she still getting money from like Harry Potter books and plays and movies, that's why people want to like boycott her, like, oh, we are not buying your book, we are not watch the movie you produce, whatever that. So, and no one dare to speak up for her, that said, she just made a silly comment or anything. It's like, if you dare to like speak up for her, you are a part of the group. That's become like a political correction or corrective
punishment, you might say.
Yeah.
What is the comment?
What were her comments, Jen? I think I remember them, but you probably have a memory.
Talking about like transgender, I think if we search, we can like it's a comment. I think it's like
she said transgender women are not women.
Who?
J.K. Rowling. I might have it wrong, but it's something along that kind of line, that kind of argument.
What the word that you say?
Transgender. So transgender, somebody who's biologically of one gender and wishes or needs to change to another gender. So trans. Yeah. So in other words, her comment was about men who change and become women. They shouldn't be regarded as real women.
Okay.
Now it's interesting because some feminists do actually argue that they shouldn't. Germaine Greer is one, and I think she might have been agreeing with Germaine Greer. I'm not sure if there was any connection there or not, but certainly Germaine Greer is of this.
Opinion.
And this is the point I think Jen's making, is that not letting people just express their position. Yeah. Cancel culture generally, yes, your examples are right, and others are generally. It has become a term of the right to use and say, oh, it's almost like, almost commenting as a left person here, but it's like
right.
It's like, for example,
right wing, and now it's like, and now right wing always criticize you. Left wing use cancel culture.
Exactly, it's the right,
and it actually came from the right wing.
It did. It's a term come from the right, and they've said all these lefties, they just want to cancel all this different kind of culture. Now, one of the classic examples that the far, it's generally the right and the far right in America make, is they're cancelling Christmas, our Christian heritage. We can't call it Christmas anymore. We have to call it the vacation. Right? Because America has become multicultural, and of course some people are trying to do is to just make it religiously neutral in government documents and education departments, and so don't say, well, it's a Christmas holiday break, it's a vacation. So they're just trying to use more neutral terminology. And that is called by the right, well, you're cancelling our culture. Our traditional culture is getting cancelled. So this might apply to other things as well, like if we think of gender-inclusive language, like using the word man is an intelligent species, oh, you shouldn't say that anymore. And I don't think we should. We should say humans. But a right winger will say, you're just trying to cancel all the traditional use of English, which uses these various, which the left would regard as sexist terms. and you're just cancelling all of our, and they'll usually exaggerate and say all, and it's not all of our linguistic traditions and the beauty of the language and blah, we can't say anything now because we just have to be so careful. I can't even open my mouth and speak because I just have to think about sexism and racism and,
everything and before you
and political correctness. It's linked with the idea of political correctness. Political correctness is a term of the right as well. It's like you're being constrained in your thinking and you don't dare step, slightly one way or the other. You've got to be so careful. In other words, there's this cancel culture just waiting to get you. And yeah, so historically, it's been a right-wing term. In terms of racism and an example of that, it's like, and I heard somebody say it the other day, who was it? And I didn't correct them because, I know. I had to go to a funeral in the countryside of my auntie, who I rarely see, and I saw my distant cousins, and they're very traditional country people, and they were talking about, the Abos, oh yeah, but it was interesting because they were saying, the Abos had the right idea about how to live, They had this collective society and they didn't have any of all of this exploitation of each other. The Abos really knew what to do. And it was really interesting.
You mean
Aborigines. No, but the term Abo, I kind of gasp, right? Because it's a real racist term. But, what they were saying was not racist at all.
That's a bad word to say.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So Abo, it was quite traditional. My parents used to say it. I probably used to say it as a kid. In the 60s, everyone used it, but the 60s was a very racist time, and it's been connected with the stolen generation and, Aboriginal people not being citizens and the exploitation of wages and all. So words that get connected with certain periods of history in your native languages too become problematic, and we have to just throw them out and, use another term, right? So now it's like Aboriginal, Indigenous, First Nations. Or,
say nigger.
Yeah, it's like nigger.
Like a nigger.
Yeah. So yeah, now nigger in the up to the 60s, kind of, and further back you go, the more neutral it got, and it wasn't, in some cases further back, it wasn't actually racist. It was just the term that was used, and some people did use it in a racial. I guess the whole context was racist, so you could say, in a sense, it was racist. So that term had to be thrown out. It's similar to that. So when my cousin said Abo, it's like, yeah. So it's a shock. But, so if I had said at that point, look, don't say that word. Like, that's just so, I can't really do that at the funeral with all the relatives. But, somebody probably could have come back and said, that's just cancel culture, just to try to clarify this example. Yeah. So, Jin, yeah, in a sense, it's an interesting creative use of it, because you're sort of turning it around and saying, generally people on the left tend to be more open about, dialogue with China, obviously seeing both not just the black, but the white and, all the colours in between about China and the Communist Party. And then that does get cancelled, and it's tending to be getting cancelled by those forces that are encouraging this tension and, towards potential, not inevitable, but potential war. So it is the left, in a sense, now that are getting cancelled, not the right. So it's an interesting reversal of the term, but it is quite appropriate, I think, and it's an interesting case, I think, of how language creates a certain way we think about something. And for you to use that term, it's actually I'd say it's actually a useful weapon in the campaign to kind of push back against things, saying, yeah, look, I mean, you put it very well, I think. But there's a kind of cultural censorship, basically, about how we talk about China. I think there is. And obviously I'm not, as an Anglo, I'm not as, instinctively sensitive as someone from Chinese origin, but if I feel it, you guys must feel it like, you know, how many times more?
Interesting, but I sometimes think too, it depends a little bit in which camp you're actually standing.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you live here in Australia, there is a good chance that the Australian culture or the Australian idea is defended to suit Australia. Now, if you're going to move to China and you live in China, and it is a good chance that in China people have the same idea. They're defending the Chinese China idea or China culture. And but if you, as a Chinese person or a Swiss person, move to another country, I'm sort of one of a few, which means I'm much more likely to get all these differing opinions to maybe what I brought with me. And therefore I'm being battered a lot more with maybe strange behavior or strange ideas, but to somebody from here, it may not be quite as bad. It's a tough one.
Yeah.
I guess the thing I think we need to add into that though is that I don't think there's any such thing as Australian culture. There's this huge complexity and range. For example, you know, I, as an Anglo-Australian, would disagree with a whole, you know, Scott Morrison. Now, you know, and that's on not just political stuff, but a whole lot of cultural stuff. We would not share the same culture. You know, no society is made up of a single culture. They're actually oppositional cultures. There are subcultures, aren't they, which are highly oppositional.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's a question of figuring out when you do come to a new country, okay, which subcultures do I kind of connect with, which ones I don't. And if you're lucky, if you use, I guess, careful strategy, you find a subculture where you're happy.
Yeah, but I guess that's really comes down to it. You have a more humanitarian sort of idea about how you think and how you feel about things, or whether you are more on the wealthy side or on the business side, or I think there's so many different positions you could be in, and that comes down to a personal sort of level, like you're saying you're left, you know, and somebody else says I'm right. So, it's hard.
Yeah. So there would be, and there are, pockets of the Australian community, and they are fairly associated with the left, but not just only that. There'd be some individuals who are probably out there who don't even know if they're right or left, never really thought about it, but they would be, you know, softer about this whole issue and not wanting to, you know, increase tensions with China. There'd be, you know, but definitely on an organisational level, it is the left who are pushing back against this increase in hostility and tension and rhetoric around China. And, you know, that happens every time there's a war anywhere. If we went back to the First World War, you know, who were the main oppositional forces against the First World War? You know, it was the left. And actually significant sectors of the left failed to oppose it sufficiently and actually voted for the war. And that caused a huge split in the early left movement in the 20th century. You know, but the left historically has been, you know, anti-war, anti-patriotism, anti-nationalism, because it sees these things as just dividing humans who we're all culturally diverse, but ultimately we're all one, you know, and there's more common interest between a worker in China and a worker in Australia than between the worker in Australia and their boss and the worker in China and their boss. There's more conflict of interests, you know, vertically, if you like, there's more conflict of interest than there is horizontally, if we use those metaphors. You know, that is a standard left position that, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your change. Workers of the world unite. People in every country connect and unite. You have nothing to lose but your change. Beautiful poetic ending to the Communist Manifesto, so we're seeing the opposite, and it just happens over and over again. The right lead various drives to war. And whether it's like Vietnam or Iraq, or how many drives to war have we had? A lot. And now we've got this one. And I just feel it's kind of strange because Adelaide, the place I've lived for 60 years, is like this quiet little backwater of the world.
City of churches.
Yes,
Come on.
has suddenly become quite potentially central, not central, but significant in the conflict.
We have to move, John.
We do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Move to Melbourne.
It might have felt bad for the last few months, but you've got a better future than us. We'll see you there.
Good discussion.
Yeah, that was a good deviation, wasn't it? A diversion, we should say, a diversion. We didn't get to Fox News, but it's kind of relevant. It's all connected.
Go home and find the Fox News.
Fox News, of course, central in the last couple or 3 or 4 years with Trump in building up the anti-Chinese rhetoric in the United States, really central. And I guess Adelaide's played its part there, because as I was saying last week, Rupert Murdoch came from Adelaide, and he's the owner of he owned, as I've mentioned a few times, his daddy gave him the news, the newspaper, the News, and he started from that. Keith Murdoch was his dad, and he owned media back in radio and TV, not TV, radio and newspapers. Sorry, newspapers back in the 20s, when the ABC began, I think 1928, I'm not sure of the date, could have been a bit later. He was very opposed to the ABC, and the Murdochs have been opposed to the ABC right from the beginning because, of course, it was major competition. The workers used to finish at the factories at 4 o'clock, and on their way home, a lot of the factories were actually in Adelaide City. On the way to the railway station, they would buy the news to catch the latest news. The paper used to come out in the morning and the afternoon. They'd sell 2, so people could keep up. Now, there was no radio, so that was the way you kept up with the hourly news. Now, suddenly along comes the ABC, which can broadcast news like every hour. Keith Murdoch went to the Prime Minister of Australia and said, I want the ABC to only broadcast news at 6 o'clock and later, so that the workers by then are home, right? That what the workers have to do, if they want to know the news straight after they finish work, they have to buy my paper. Then they can go home and listen to the ABC radio news at 6. That's why we have our news at 6. That has stuck, right? And the ABC's moved to 7. But the point is that Murdoch, his dad, media baron, they were opposed to the ABC, right? That's the hostility between the commercial media and the ABC is not just on the level of left and right ideology, it's actually economic, like competition. Here's this free service, and the other is not, because you pay for it through, ultimately, indirectly through advertising. And so they've been slamming it and criticising it for pretty much a century now. But Keith Murdoch had many newspapers, and he thought, if I give a whole lot of newspapers to my son, that'll spoil him. He won't learn to be a good businessman. So I'm only going to give him one, because he owned others in Melbourne and Sydney. I'm going to give him the one in Adelaide. Right? Adelaide's small and insignificant. So, we'll just give him that one and we'll see what he can do. And, you know, he obviously had talent, and he started with that, and he built and built and built, and, you know, eventually inherited his dad's ones. But by then he was also, in his own right, a multi-billion-dollar media mogul, as we say. We use the word for Indian kings, the mogul, which I guess is related to a Mongol. Yeah, the Moguls who, you know, swept in from the north of India and took over in what was, whenever it was, certainly in the 16, 17, 1800s, the Moguls. Yeah, so he's a media mogul. So he moved from getting big in Australia to then England, and he got big there. And then he moved to the US and bought up there. And that's where he stayed. And he couldn't buy media in the US unless he was a US citizen. So he became a US citizen, and then that's how he's got Fox News and Sky in England, and now Sky News here. So Sky News here is the equivalent of Fox. So next week when we look at Fox News, we could put our Australian hats on, and if you've seen any Sky News, it's pretty much the same.
Your other mate, Chris Kenny, is
Yeah.
having a discussion tonight about nuclear.
Is he?
Sky News.
All
I just
right.
read it on the
Okay.
on the front page.
Right. Yes, Chris Kenny's on our list, isn't he? Yeah. He's on the right-wing journalist list, and yeah, he's on Sky. I don't watch Sky very much, but I just hear about it sometimes when somebody says something outrageous, then the other media report it.
Subscribe to them? I don't have them.
No.
No.
Do you have to subscribe to it?
I don't know.
No, because I just, anyone watch it or subscribe, or if so, please leave this Zoom class immediately. Cancel culture. Yeah. All right. Well, look, that was interesting. The whole China thing is going to be huge. Can I just tell you one personal thing? On my holiday in Northern Territory, that was a big discovery for me. I went to the museum there. It's a good little museum, great art gallery. The museum's good too. And they have the history of Darwin, and the Chinese are really strongly featured in the museum there. And one of the key things is just the most important statistic in the whole place, I reckon, is until 1911, actually, that obviously there was the white, invasion of Aboriginal territory, but Anglo whites were not, so Aboriginal people were the majority in the Northern Territory for a long, long time. And then when there was colonisation, the Anglo whites were not the majority, the next biggest majority. Who were the next biggest? Chinese. Right? The Chinese actually outnumbered Anglos in the Northern Territory for a long time, right through the 19th century. And I think until 1911, when the Commonwealth took the Northern Territory from South Australia. South Australia it was called the Northern Territory because it was the Northern Territory of South Australia. New South Wales, the whole place was called New South Wales, all of Australia, for a long time. Then it got divided up into the colonies and the states, right? The various colonies, before Federation. In 1853, New South Wales gave South Australia the Northern Territory. The Northern Territory was a kind of problem area. It was very hard to develop, cost millions to put a railway up there. They never completed it until the 1980s, right? Only recently. And, to get a port up there and keep it functioning and supply it, it's a lot of effort and a lot of money. And New South Wales, Sydney didn't want to do it. So they said, Adelaide, you've got your railway line, up to Unadilla. Why don't you look after Alice Springs and Darwin? South Australia said foolishly yes for a while and then couldn't develop it. And so by 1911, the new country had formed, right? 1901, formed the country. And so the Commonwealth, the national government said, right, we'll actually take it back from South Australia now. And it becomes this territory. But at that moment, all those people, previously they had a vote for the South Australian government. They lost that vote. They could vote for no one. There wasn't a government. It was just directly ruled from Canberra, and those people couldn't vote for anybody in Canberra. You know, it's kind of undemocratic. But the point is that up until that time, the Chinese population was getting bigger and bigger, and they were the second biggest majority. In 1901, the national government had passed the White Australia policy. They wanted to make Australia white. So what they actually did after 1911, the Commonwealth moved in, and they started getting rid of Chinese people, deporting them, actually, you know, putting them on ships and sending them back to China, quite large numbers. And there are photos, these really sad photos, one in particular, of these old guys sitting around, probably about 30 of them, just waiting to get put on a boat to get sent back. And to China, like sent back, they'd been born in Australia and they'd probably been there about 4 or 5 generations, and they were just getting chucked out. So, you know, I'm mentioning that in this context because, you know, this history of anti-Asian sentiment, racism, you know, it's got long and deep roots. It's like the Aboriginal issue. It's probably the second longest racial history that Australia has in relation to, you know, white Anglos discriminating against various groups and oppressing them in various ways and creating various myths and rhetoric around them and so on and so forth. You know, I always used to, up until now, I always remember my friend historian Humphrey McQueen, left-wing historian, he had an interesting figure, which was that after the gold rush in Victoria in the late 19th century, 20% of Victorians were Chinese. And I always used to think that was pretty amazing, you know. But Northern Territory, actually, the majority, you know, of non-Aboriginal people were Chinese. And to me, that is an amazing thing. And that was changed, like, through very deliberate government policy of actually what we call deporting people, kicking them out of the country, just putting them on ships and sending them out. They did that. They must have done it on a mass level to change. And then they had all sorts of other policies of encouraging white immigration into the area. And they shifted the numbers, so they're quite different now, of course. But yeah, there's a bit of, to me, at least hidden history for me for a long time. But, you know, that relates to kind of what's happening now. You know, these roots, these old roots get dug up and used again, recycled, you know, in different ways. And so it's important to know our history so that we can see the continuities and try to do something about it.
Yeah, and so much of it you sort of think that's brand new.
Yeah.
But really, it has deep roots way back.
Yeah. And if you understand those roots, you can understand who's doing it and why, to some degree anyway. Yeah, get a better understanding. Yeah. All right, guys, I hope that's interesting for you. Yeah. And we'll thank Zoomers for being patient today, because we've had a bit of a weird one with my computer not working, so I haven't been able to share documents properly and see you all very, very effectively. So thanks for being with us. And I have recorded this and I'll send people the recording. If you make sure that you've sent me an email, I'll put you on the list, and we'll catch you next week.
Yeah.
So have a good week.
Thank you.
Right,
Thank you.
Ciao, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.